basically made a judgment that after two strikes, April 13, 14, and yesterday, the day before yesterday, on directly against Israel, that they have no choice but to respond in order to avoid creating what you could call a new normal. Remember, the Iranian response on both of these attacks came as a consequence of Israel striking an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps general in Damascus and then killing Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, in Lebanon. So the Israelis have not struck Iranian territory, only in response to the April 13, 14 attacks. But this time, the Israeli reaction, I think, will be more severe. I suspect it will be limited, at least for this round, to military targets, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps command and control facilities, ballistic missile launchers, weapons depots, and the like. When the Iranians respond, as I suspect they will, whenever the Israeli strike occurs, if in fact they open up with a saturation attack, doubling or tripling the number of missiles that they launched the day before yesterday, then I think the Israelis will respond again, although this time I suspect the targets will be the nuclear sites, at least the Natanz facility, and maybe oil exporting facilities. Kharg Island, price of oil is going to jump. We could, and I'm not predicting we get there, but we could be moving towards something the Middle East has never seen before, which is a multi-front war involving not the deployment of thousands of ground forces, but a war involving one-way attack drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, AI, cyber, and airstrikes. And I think
so
that's certainly possible. And if that comes to fruition, again, I'm not predicting we're inexorably headed there. It's hard to see the U.S. not becoming involved.
So how do you de-escalate from here?
Frankly, I've been into diplomacy. I was at State Department for almost 28 years. I don't think there's any way right now to stop the first two shoes that are going to drop. Number one, the Israeli strike. And the Iranians will have to make an assessment about how comprehensive severe the Israeli strike was. Is there the possibility that the Iranians would simply not respond? I think that depends on the nature of what the Israelis do. Remember, the primary organizing principle for this regime is not a war with Israel or the United States. It's regime preservation. It's survivability. The last thing the Iranian regime needs, in addition to a terrible economy, deep polarization in the public, and deep rejection on part of large numbers of Iranians to the clerical and military regime of the IRGC. The last thing they need is a major escalation with Israel and the United States. And I think they are counting on the Biden administration restraining the Israelis. I think that is probably not a safe bet right now.
Is Iran being so backed into a corner and feeling so insecure that we're now looking at the possibility that it thinks that maybe weaponizing its nuclear program is the best defense?
It's an interesting question, and I've been asking myself the same thing lately. I mean, they've just seen their crown jewel, Hezbollah, the most lethal, well-armed, non-state actor in the world, hollowed out within 2 weeks. Hundreds of commanders over the last year killed, veteran foundational members of Hezbollah from the early 80s killed. The Hassan Nasrallah, charismatic leader, and the Israelis killed his predecessor in 1992, Abbas Moussaoui. And it's being reported that the successor to Nasrallah, Hashim Saifuddin, that the Israelis may have tried to kill him in Beirut, disrupting comms, network of intelligence, command and control. So the Iranians have to make a judgment. Are they going to try to rebuild Hezbollah to secure their foothold in Lebanon? Maybe. Will they now, having become a nuclear weapons threshold state, they have within weeks the capacity to produce enough fissile material. They don't yet know, they haven't yet produced a physics package, miniaturized the warhead, or found the delivery system. But that could take a year or so. And the even any traces of weaponization in this environment would most likely mean additional Israeli strikes, and maybe even the commitment on the part of the last four presidents of the United States, who said Iran will not be able to produce a nuclear weapon. So yes, they are in a corner. They badly miscalculated with respect to Nasrallah,
Right.
and I think the attack, frankly, surprised me the other day. It was potentially catastrophic. Could have caused significant civilian deaths and casualties, even with a terribly sophisticated multi-layer air defense system that the Israelis actually possess. So we are a few steps short on the escalatory ladder of something that could actually move beyond and get out of control.
You know, you've obviously spent many years within this world of diplomacy, you know, in this part of the world. And I do wonder, how do you assess the kind of meaningful influence that Washington has on what Israel does strategically and operationally from here?
I mean, I think you have to look at the last year. And I think you have to realize that the Middle East is littered with the remains of great powers who wrongly believe they can impose their will, their ambitions, their schemes, their dreams, their peace plans, their war plans on smaller ones. When the conflict becomes existential or near existential, as it's been for Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and now for Israel and Hezbollah, and perhaps now for Israel and Iran, the impact of external powers in an existential conflict to fundamentally dissuade, restrain, change, alter fundamentally the trajectory of the courses that these leaders are on, I think, frankly, is very, very limited. It's their neighborhood. They're prepared to invest far more than the United States has ever been prepared to invest. And you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, the two longest wars in American history, despite the asymmetry of power which favored the United States, the standard for victory in these two wars proved to be never could we win, but when could we leave, and what would we leave behind? So I have very little confidence. No fault of the Biden administration. You've got one of the most consequential elections in American history within a month. And the last thing the Biden administration needs, frankly, is a major conflagration in the Middle East. But at the same time, that election constrains the degree to which this president is prepared to use the influence he has on Israel. That's the paradox that the administration finds itself in. They need to prevent a major conflagration, but they can't use the influence they have with the Israelis, because the act of restraining the Israelis in these circumstances would allow conservative Democrats and the Republican Party, which has emerged as the Israel Can Do No Wrong Party, to basically pick up points, and it would display weakness in their eyes with respect to supporting Israel. So I think it really is a bind. You need to hope somehow, and I wouldn't bank on this, that both Israel and certainly Iran is risk averse to understand exactly the difficult situation that they are in, and whether or not they're prepared to absorb an Israeli hit, which could come, in my judgment, anytime from Saturday night, get through the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, which is today, anytime from Saturday into Sunday morning and in the next week or so. I think that's the frame within which the Israelis will probably respond. And, you know, I suppose the good news, if there is any good news, is that there is a degree of extraordinary coordination between the Netanyahu government and the Biden administration at this point. There was no coordination with the walkie-talkies and the pagers. There was no coordination with the hit on Nasrallah. There was certainly no coordination, because the Israelis haven't claimed responsibility for it, for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh on July 31st in Tehran. But there is coordination here. And I think it reflects the fact that the Israelis understand Hitting Nasrallah in Lebanon is one thing. Striking core infrastructure targets, military facilities in Iran, pushes this conflict to a new level. And I'm hoping that Washington and Jerusalem will have worked out something that will deliver the message, the severe consequences that Jake Sullivan has talked about, but at the same time, not created a point of departure for, as I mentioned before, for something the Middle East has never experienced, which is a multi-front war.
Aaron David Miller, thank you for ending on some semblance of a hopeful note there, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Let's take a look at how all of this is playing out when it comes to a great deal of uncertainty for global investors, right? This is a Friday session futures picture that we're seeing. A lot to the downside. Sydney futures looking like we'll see really on the back foot as we get into the start of trading in about 15 minutes or so. Chicago Nikkei futures also looking a little bit soft at the moment. We could really see a lot more action when it comes to trading on the FX side as well, with this soaring in haven demand for the dollar, as well as getting into non-farm payrolls as well. We did see that big move in the euro as well as the pound overnight. EU member states, in the meantime, are preparing to vote on Friday and imposing definitive tariffs as high as 45% on imported EVs made in China. Let's bring our China correspondent, Min Min Lo, for more. So, Min Min, do we get a sense of how the vote is going to proceed?
Yeah, it's really hard to call that right now. It could be quite split. We know that European officials were quite confident that they have enough votes to push through the tariffs, but then they were also a little bit cautious about making a prediction after the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez had broke ranks with the EU after a visit to Beijing. Germany as well is another key player that had abstained in the previous vote. German officials have signaled they could abstain again. Reuters is reporting they may even oppose the vote this time. That's after we have heard from the CEOs of Mercedes, Volkswagen. They were all lobbying the government to really vote against the tariffs for fear of retaliation from Beijing, because these German car makers, they make about a third of their sales in China. They sell millions of cars to China every year, and Beijing, for one, had hinted that they could retaliate with tariffs on vehicles with large engines. This vote is taking place later today, but we know ahead of this vote, the Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao had been on this whirlwind tour to Europe to try to convince European partners to vote against it. They had discussions around putting price controls and volume controls on cars exported to Europe. Not clear now whether there is any breakthrough on that front, but we'll see. We know the two sides will continue with those talks even after the vote takes place today.
With all of the economic risks that Beijing is facing, of course, we have seen the barrage of stimulus measures. Could we even see more fiscal measures in place?
Yeah, there has been a lot of anticipation that more fiscal measures could come in after that Politburo meeting that signaled the government will spend as necessary. And now we have leading economists, one from a former head of a research institute that is linked to the Ministry of Finance, calling on the government to issue up to 4 trillion or even 10 trillion yuan in special sovereign bonds. He said that if these bonds come with long maturities of 30 to 50 years, that offers great flexibility. It wouldn't overburden the government. And this comes as more and more economists are expecting that there could be some sort of fiscal package. What is unclear now is the scale of it and the contents of it. And it comes as there has also been warning that stock market mania could actually be a bust, especially if fiscal measures don't follow through to really fix some of the fundamental issues in the economy.
Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Min Lo there. And of course, as we head towards the market opens here across Asia, we'll be watching the EV space. Nikkei now reporting that Toyota and Subaru will work together to market an EV in Japan, the US, and Europe for 2026. Production will begin around January of that year at a Subaru plant. Capacity will rise to as much as 20,000 vehicles per month. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
It is inevitable.
Chloe!
Hey, Ed.
They will grow up, discover who they are, what they want from this world, and how they will make it better. And while parenting has changed, how much you care has not. That's why Instagram is introducing teen accounts. Automatic protections for who can contact them and the content they can see.